Happy Monday. Thank you for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. Now we are in week 7 of our series on neurodivergence, and a huge thank you to Heather Archer for sharing her experience with Tourette, which falls under the neurodivergence umbrella. Now, this week we're talking about the top myths of Tourette syndrome. Now, before we jump into this week's video, just a quick reminder, when we're talking about neurodivergence in the workplace, we're talking about adults, we're not talking about children, and we're also talking about individuals that need low support. So a huge thank you to YouTube user in the USA for dropping in a comment and letting me know that the community prefers high support and low support versus high functioning and low functioning. So when we think about support in the workplace, a high support individual would need a lot more assistance than a low support individual when thinking through their day-to-day activities. So we are talking about adults in the workplace that are low support in their day-to-day. All right, now that we have that clarified, let's jump into the video. All right, so with that, let's look at the myths of Tourette's. Now, the very first myth that we want to talk about is when we think about Tourette's, most of us are going to think about swearing or extreme language, cursing, things like that. Now, while that is a part of Tourette's, it's a very small part. Only 10% of individuals with Tourette's has that vocal tic to where they're swearing and saying the extreme language. So Tourette's can show up in a multitude of ways. It could be vocal tics, but also, and this gets us into myth number 2, it can be physical tics. So the second myth that we're going to look at is that Tourette's is only vocal tics, saying or making sounds. When, as we heard from Heather's perspective last week, Tourette's can actually be very much a physical tic as well. So it could be head nodding or jerking. It could be a movement of the hands or the arms. There could be a bunch of different ways that it can show up, both vocal and physical. And then the third myth that we want to talk about when it comes to Tourette's is that people with Tourette's can control their tics if they really want to. So when we think about Tourette's, the best analogy that I saw for it as I was doing my research is that a tic with Tourette's is a lot like a sneeze. You can do stuff like if you got a sneeze, you can do this, you can push it away, but eventually it's gonna come out. And many times, at least for me, with sneezes, the longer I push it back, the bigger the sneeze is going to be. So with the tics in Tourette's, it's very much like that sneeze. It's going to happen. Now, as a child with Tourette's grows into an adult with Tourette's, they are learning different tools and resources to be able to slow down the tic or mask the tic to where it's not as obvious. But it is not something that they can control. It is not something that they can make go away. It is a neurological condition. Their brain thinks differently than neurotypical, and it shows up in these vocal and physical tics. So as we go through and we're thinking about Tourette's, remembering these top 3 myths. The first is that people with Tourette's only curse and swear. That's not true. About 10% of individuals with Tourette's have that particular vocal tic to where they're cursing and swearing. The second is that Tourette's is only vocal tics. That is not the case either. Tourette's can be vocal or physical. And then finally, the third is that people with Tourette's would control their tics if they really wanted to. Also not the case. When the tics come, the tics have to find a release. As adults, individuals with Tourette's have simply found a way to mask or minimize the tics from showing up. All right. This is the end of the series. We have looked at autism, we have looked at ADHD, and we have looked at Tourette's. There are other areas that fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence, but these are the 3 that we are looking at for this series. We will do a final wrap up next week, so make sure and join us for that. And as always, have an absolutely amazing week, and don't forget, you got this. I'll see you next week.